So this video is going to be the bargain of all bargains, as I'm going to be reviewing two movies in one video, Dune Part 2 and Kung Fu Panda 4. I was a little late on seeing both of these films. I didn't see each until a week after they both officially released, so I figured why not just combine it into one big double feature movie review. So sit back, relax, and I hope you enjoy.
For what is to come.
Here, I'll first be doing a review of Dune Part 2. Now, I didn't give two shits about the first Dune when it came out in 2021. It's not that I thought it looked bad, it just didn't look very interesting to me. Nothing particularly interesting or dynamic going on with the characters, the setting, or the story, and I obviously had no attachment to the original source material because I had never read the books, so the movie was a pass for me. I didn't see it in the theaters or on HBO Max in the few years afterwards. But because the start of 2024 has been just so goddamn dreadful when it comes to movies and big releases, Dune Part 2 was the first notable movie that people seemed to have any interest in, and it was getting plenty of hype from critics. Before the film's official release on March 1st, a few weeks before I finally checked the movie out, the first Dune on HBO Max, or just Max now, retroactively the movie has now been titled Dune Part 1. And my verdict for the first Dune? It was aight. You know, it was certainly easy to see after watching the movie what people were talking about when it came to it being the influence for Star Wars. Certainly had an amazing ensemble cast and some nice scenery. But as far as anything all that interesting or dynamic happening on the screen when it came to the characters or the story, it was just meh to me. To the movie's credit, though, it did very good business given when it was released. You know, it came out in that 2021 period of time where movies were just a few months into getting theaters reopened. And the movie ended up doing $434 million worldwide on a $165 million budget. The sequel, Dune Part 2, was supposed to release last year, November 2023, but it got pushed back due to the actors' strike and them not being able to promote the movie. Given how a lot of this movie's budget was likely spent on the ensemble cast here, you weren't going to spend all that goddamn money on an ensemble cast and not have them be able to promote the film. The film's story continues where things left off with Part 1. Paul Atreides comes and unites with the Freeman people of the desert planet Arrakis to wage war against the House of Harkonnen, sort of white, bald people and all that kind of stuff. Now, I got that synopsis, minus the whole white, bald people part off a wiki. If I were to add just a little bit more detail to it, the other main development is how Paul starts to fall for Zendaya's character, and there's other war-type stuff that happens. Yeah. My basic feeling for this movie is kind of similar to how I felt about Part 1, where a lot of the basic things that are going on here, I just don't find to be super interesting or exciting. But I do recognize it for being well made and well directed, and I will say this, it's definitely better than the first Dune, which again, I thought was just alright. There's definitely more here that kept my interest this time around. On the most basic level, the stuff that happened with Paul and Zendaya's character, Chani. Though in the movie, I could have swore I heard it said like Johnny, as in Johnay. I don't think a lot of this whole stuff with the characters would have worked had they not had such great actors here. I mean, this is a top tier ensemble all-star cast of A-level performers. There's also some decent action here and there in a variety of forms. You know, you get hand-to-hand fights, flight type sequences, and gunfare. The best bit of action, though, is a hand-to-hand fight that admittedly happens almost at the very end of the movie, but it was still pretty dope. Now, for some reason, a lot of people have been hyping the sandworm scenes in this like they were OMG, just 10 out of 10 amazing. And after watching the film, I don't know about that. They were definitely solid. You know, they had some decent visuals and the score that went with those scenes was good. But I don't know, it wasn't anything all that spectacular, the few sandworm scenes that there were in here. Although anything that involves giant worms like that can only make me think of one thing.
It was big! It was all wiggly! And it ate everything!
That's horrible!
Now, this is another one of those movies like Oppenheimer last year, where there's a lot of hype about seeing it in a premium format. We're talking about Dolby, IMAX, 70mm, etc. I saw the film in Dolby, and to be honest, I'm not sure if the price is all that worth it. While there is some cool scenery and action here and there in spurts, most of this 2-hour, 40-plus minute movie is people talking about prophecies, strategies, war tactics, etc., and talking in a very slow, solemn manner. So I don't know if or really think you get your money's worth in that respect. But the pacing surprisingly didn't feel all that bad, and again, this nearly about 2 hour and 40-minute long movie. It may sound like I don't have a ton of enthusiasm about this film, and admittedly I don't, but I still recognize it for being well made. I'll give 7.5 out of 10 for Dune Part 2. For a comparison, the first film would get probably like a 6.5 or a 7 from me, so this one is definitely better.
Just the right amount of spice. Oh.
And now will be a review of Kung Fu Panda 4. Mostly everyone would agree that's seen all 3 Kung Fu Panda films, that it's a quality animated series. The first film was a huge surprise. I remember going in to watch it. I was about 12 at the time, watching it in the theaters, thinking it wouldn't be much besides some cheap children's entertainment with a whole lot of celebrity voices and not a lot of creativity. But it turned out to be really damn good. Could go as far as to even say great. The 2 follow-ups were quality as well, although I was always baffled why the they released the 3rd film in January. It felt as if DreamWorks, who was under a transition ownership period at the time, was just dumping the movie out and not really giving it a chance to succeed. Regardless, the 3rd film wrapped up all the story threads, fully realized Poe's inner dragon warrior, he found his father, completed the story, and thus was the end of the Kung Fu Panda saga. Right?
Wrong!
When Kung Fu Panda 4 was announced, it just felt like another one of those sequels that just felt unnecessary. I know you can say that about any sequel, but just in terms of being a story that matters. As I mentioned, the story had wrapped up nicely at the end of 3, and anything after that just seemed unnecessary. But who's to say that the folks at Universal and DreamWorks couldn't make something worthwhile? In Part 4, Poe teams up with a criminal in order to take on a foe named the Chameleon, an Empress Chameleon type figure with shape-shifting abilities in order to look like anyone, but she's also looking to harness the power of Kung Fu from former masters, including some of Poe's former enemies from the previous Kung Fu Panda films. Now, one of the notable things from the trailers was the absence of the Furious Five. Those were the Kung Fu masters from the first 3 films, Tigress, Monkey, Crane, Mantis, and Viper. In an obvious attempt to reduce the budget by cutting back on the amount of celebrity voice actors, they're not in Part 4. Their absence is explained in a throwaway line early on in the story. Given the nature of this film story, they wouldn't really have fit in, and if they were, they just would have been crammed in there, and there just would have been too many characters, I guess. In speaking of the story, I mentioned that this film needed to really justify its existence with a story that was worth a and in large part, I don't really think it did so. It felt kind of like a sequel story, the kind where it's just kind of finding things for characters to do to pass the time until you get to the climax. Things like the inclusion of Poe's 2 dads felt completely fillerish, not to mention the story buildup of the first 3 films to fully realize Poe's inner dragon warrior potential at the end of Part 3, only for his main mission in Part 4 is for him to find an immediate dragon warrior successor as ordered by Shifu. What? I mean, who the in the writer's room thought that would be a good idea after what was built up after the first 3 films? Story aside, that's not to say there wasn't stuff I enjoyed here. The movie continues a trend of animated movies these days, adding that layer of a 2D-like effect to the 3D animation. Now, it's not as stylized as Wish or as much as DreamWorks' own Puss in Boots: The Last Wish from a couple years ago. It's really most notable in the newer characters here. The characters, though, that are returning from the previous films, like Poe and Shifu, look more so like their 3D selves. I guess it's kind of a weird effect on how my eyes tricked me in that respect. Now, this stylized animation does make for some really good action scenes, which there's quite a few throughout this film. I mean, you still can't help but like Jack Black in the role as Poe. It's a great role for him, although in this one, Poe is really beyond all the fat jokes that were at his expense in the first 3 films. Now he's just a straight up warrior whose kung fu can wreck some serious Aquafina is, well, Aquafina. She plays the role of the criminal that he teams up with there, a small gray fox named Shen. Now, I liked Aquafina's voice acting in Raya and the Last Dragon, but over the last few years, it's like, whoa, that doesn't mean I want to see her in every animated movie that comes out. You know, we just heard her voice for Migration. Now she's in this one. She's got a very distinctive voice. So when you hear it, it's like, oh my goodness, they're putting her in this again. And really the only thing I could think of while seeing this character visually, Shen, is that holy shit. Someone had some fan fiction idea in terms of what if Judy Hopps and Nick Wilde from Zootopia actually had a baby, because it actually looks like the perfect hybrid of those two. The movie also continues the series trend of having some pretty good antagonists. You know, each film has had a nice central bad guy for Poe to take on. As mentioned here, the Chameleon is the villain of this film. She's an empress-type figure of a neighboring kingdom who can shapeshift into anyone. Now, while watching this movie or listening to it, I thought it was Angela Bassett that was doing the voice of the Chameleon. But then when I saw the credits, it was actually Viola Davis. You know, she was a solid antagonist. She was good. I really liked her design. She had some nice moments. Definitely not my favorite antagonist of the series, though. Her presence, though, and the way that the story played out, allowed for one of Poe's original foes to return. No, not Stairs, but Tai Lung, the main bad guy from the first film. And man, just the look of that character combined with Ian McShane's just great voice makes for an awesome character. While he's not in this film a ton, he has a few notable scenes, and his appearance is more nuanced than what was shown in the first Kung Fu Panda, so it's definitely pretty cool to see him again. You also see Poe's main foes from parts 2 and 3, although it's done in kind of an awkward, non-speaking type fashion because they couldn't get the voice actors to come back, I guess. Though there were some good moments and action in the film's climax, the very end of this film really confirmed to me that they probably should have just left this as a trilogy, mainly because you can just see that there wasn't really a worthwhile story worth telling here. You know, anytime you have a sequel, you should have that moment where like, whoa, you know, that was a worthwhile story to tell, especially if you're continuing something that was seemingly at its end. But you know, money and franchises talk. It still has way more thought and imagination than most of the bullshit put out by Illumination. I'll be nice and go 7 out of 10 for Kung Fu Panda 4. It wasn't bad, it had some enjoyable moments, just a little unnecessary. The movie does leave the door open for another Kung Fu Panda adventure, instead of trying to do the fake out bull as if this was the last one. If DreamWorks though wants to really surprise folks out there with the sequel, how about a Shark Tale 2? Nah, just kidding. Or am I? So that'll do it for this review of Kung Fu Panda 4. If you made it to the end of this video, thank you for watching.